Hello, and welcome to Unwatchables, where there is truly no place like home. And thank God, I am Marc Dottavio.
And I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we are joined by author Derek Fisher for two eerily similar and similarly miserable movies. Both are the directorial debuts of renowned British actors who would never direct again. Both follow dysfunctional working-class families in rural England, and both star Ray Winstone as the worst parent of all time. The films are Gary Oldman's harrowing 1997 drama NIL by Mouth and Tim Roth's harrowing 1999 incest drama The War Zone. And here to help us keep it all in the family is Derek Fisher. He is an author whose work has appeared in countless literary magazines. His last book, Nightlife, is available now through Posthuman magazine, and his new story collection, Container, is out now through With an X Books. Did I get all that correct, Derek?
You did, absolutely. Yeah,
okay,
thanks so much
great.
for having me on, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being there. We did get a chance to read some of the stories from your book that were wild, and I enjoyed them very much. And I guess I wonder, how do you classify yourself in a certain way? Because, we've had a lot of horror authors, experimental writers on this show before.
Transgressive fiction.
Exactly. And I feel like I see a little bit of all of that in your writing.
I try as hard as I can to be totally off the map, undefinable. No, I'm kidding about that. I have no idea. I struggle with this all the time, like how to, what's my spiel about myself or the work. I think some of it leans towards horror. We did the launch at a horror bookstore in Toronto, so that makes it feel like, oh, I guess I'm in that world now. But I don't know. Some of these stories are like pretty, realist, kind of have nothing to do with the horror, the supernatural, or anything genre related. So I don't know. It's a good question. I'm asking myself the same thing.
All right, yeah, and there is a gothic quality, maybe, kind of a danger that you're working in. I don't know if you want to expand on how you play with content or push content, because I mean, as far as any taboos or the darkness of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe specifically with this collection too. I mean, is there something that you feel kind of unifies these, or are these things that you've maybe published elsewhere or kind of, brought together at a certain point?
I think the gothic thing for sure. I agree with that. I think that's there. But a little more than half of these stories were published in journals before the book came together.
Mm-hmm.
It took me ages to figure out how to curate it into a table of contents that made sense. And I don't, those kinds of things are never perfect or finished. I think you just kind of end up with something. At least that's my experience with it. But I think I wanted it to feel like, with the book Container specifically, I think I wanted it to feel like this, this bouncing feeling of kind of like darker or maybe transgressive, and then light, kind of an up and down dark light. Some of the stories have heart, some don't. Some are really cynical, others aren't. And I think I wanted it to just be a balance of that. I don't really know why. It felt right. It felt like the right way to curate a collection that sort of juggles the darker stuff with some of the more approachable, fun stuff. So it's just how it ended up, really. Not a ton of. I guess I wasn't so intentional about how I wanted the book to be received. I sort of put it together in a way that felt like it made sense to me, and this is what ended up being the book.
I guess it would be like trying to track list an album, like after you have all the songs together and get the flow right between them. I never thought of that before.
And balance is always a thing we see on this podcast, as far as what separates the truly difficult from maybe something that does, I don't know, not maybe more often than not points towards something that has more merit or more going on. But there are certain ones that we've tackled on here that is just, it goes into the darkness and it stays there almost to the point of like, yeah, it's like almost, it almost feels nonsensical that it doesn't let the light in, at least at certain points, right? Or let some levity here or some other element fall in rather than just staying in the dark, you know?
Yeah, and you can just stretch more, right? Like you can play with. I feel like there's a lot of variety just to what I read. Between the different sections, where the first one almost feels like almost like poetry, and and then other ones have more of like a narrative to them. So that must be fun to just be able to stretch a little bit.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. My sister's also a writer. She's a film critic by trade. She's like a horror film critic, and she's trying to write more prose. And she asked me, like, how do you write? Your stuff is all very different. Like each story all seems very different from the next. How do you stretch yourself so wide? I don't know. I just sort of shrug my shoulders. I'm like, I don't know. I want to write about as many whatever crazy thoughts fly through my head, and so they just come
even
out
the
this
prose
way.
style seems to shift, here and there, which is cool. Yeah, it's like, oh, he's like this, but no, he's like this too. That's interesting.
And I kind of envy writers who are really good at like pinning down a style, like a unique patented style. Think of do you guys know the writer Shane Jesse Christmas?
No.
He's Australian, and he's very much in the kind of indie lit scene, the sort of veering towards horror scene. He has books with publishing houses like Apocalypse Party, who authors like B.R. Yeager are published with. But he has this very, very distinctive style. It's kind of like this machine gun prose style where it's all written in these sentence fragments, and it's like a whole book, a whole small book, but just written in these like super blistering, kind of absurd, usually pretty violent and like pretty sexual sentence fragments. It just feels like you're constantly getting hit with shrapnel. And then what it does is it creates this crazy rhythm, but also this like really intense sense of dread. Like his writing is super dread inducing, even if some of the things you're reading feel like kind of normal. And then he'll veer into something like really off the wall. And all his books are like that. It's like very clearly a patented style. Whereas I feel like I read other authors like I don't know, when I read someone like Charlie Nelsby, who's also like in the same kind of scene, this sort of indie horror scene. I feel like each one of her books is pretty different from the next in terms of voice and tone and what she's doing, but they all still somehow manage to speak to one another.
Yeah, we've had a lot of writers like that on here, including B.R. Yeager. And I would encourage anybody listening who was into that stuff, who checked any of that stuff out through our show or not, that this is definitely up that alley and you should check it out. And B.R. Yeager, was he the one? Did he choose the Bully and Mysterious Skin?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, a lot of you guys didn't end up, choosing horror movies or even movies that were particularly experimental. So is this, did you choose these two movies because that's just the kind of thing that you're into? Is there any connection there with your work? Where did these films come from?
Okay, so when I was a kid, like, I don't know, like pretty young, like a young teenager, like a preteen, I always wanted to find the most fucked up shit. Like whatever it was, the most disturbing film, whatever it could be, I wanted to know what it was. I like sought out the most hardcore movies I could find. And like as a little kid, I was pretty confined to. Back then I didn't know how to look. Right, the internet wasn't what it was today. And I remember having this like really breakthrough moment when I saw Natural Born Killers. I think as like an 8, 9, or 10-year-old, like something like that, and being blown away with how violent a film could be. And that, like always like
we'll get to that one day.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. And so like I remember being in this movie store in Toronto. I think it was like Suspect Video, and seeing, I think it was The War Zone on the shelf, and just like not really knowing what it was. And I was with my cousin, and she said, "Oh, my brothers were at the premiere of this at TIFF, because the North American premiere had been at the Toronto Film Festival." And she had like distinctly remembered them coming home from seeing this movie at the festival and being like really shaken up. And Tim Roth they went because like Tim Roth was there, and they were like big fans of Tim Roth, through like Quentin Tarantino's work, like having seen him in things like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. And so they went to go see this movie, The War Zone, and like didn't know what they were getting themselves into.
Oh my God. It'll be fun. It'll be just like Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, like I think they had no idea. They just knew it was
Is it a war movie?
Yeah. And then so they saw the film and were obviously shocked. And then I think we're even more kind of taken in by the question and answer period that happened, where apparently the audience was not happy with Tim Roth. And they were asking him questions like, why did you do this to us? And so my cousin was like telling me about this, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to see this. So I saw The War Zone. I was like, I don't remember exactly how old I was. I mean, this would have been a few years after it came out. And of course was, pretty shocked by what I saw. And then I think saw NIL by Mouth shortly after that for sort of similar reasons. Like, I was like looking for stuff that was supposed to be rough, and just sort of came across this. NIL by Mouth feels like one of those films that's gone like criminally under the radar, given that it's directed by one of the biggest actors in the world. Like Gary Oldman's a massive star, and I feel like I never hear anyone talk about this film. But in my like quest to find the most disturbing, weird stuff, I really took to British 90s cinema. Two of my absolute favorite films of all time that I see in the same kind of pool are Naked and The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, Her Lover. And like I think there's a few others that are just sort of in this, I don't know, in this arena of 90s British films that just feel super, super dark when you watch them, but have all this kind of spirit. Like they're filled with just this endless intensity. And all the, like, NIL by Mouth, The War Zone, Naked, and The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, Her Lover. Those are like four films that are all, maybe with the exception of War Zone and NIL by Mouth, they all feel like quite different in terms of what they're about, but they all share this kind of crazy intensity.
Yeah, Mike Leigh, came into mind immediately with, especially with NIL by Mouth. Actually, because Gary Oldman and Tim Roth were both in the same Mike Leigh movie, Meantime. So I feel like I can...
Hilarious.
Yeah, which is...
And they're like, let's go make a fucked up movie, brother.
Yeah, let's go make some more movies where Americans and Canadians will have to put on the subtitles to understand what they're saying.
My God. My God.
Yeah, and so if we're just starting with NIL by Mouth now, that came out in 1997 and is to date the only film that Gary Oldman has written and directed. And even though obviously it's not like it made a lot of money or was a big commercial film or anything, but Kathy Burke, who plays the kind of abused wife, I think they're
Very
married
abused,
in this,
actually,
aren't they?
not kind of.
But I'm saying, is she actually his wife? I can't remember if she was his wife or they were married. Okay. Well, she won the Best Actress prize at Cannes, and this won a lot of BAFTAs, like Best Original Screenplay. So it was definitely appreciated when it came out, and it has a score by Eric Clapton of all people. And
He would write a soundtrack for a movie about beating your wife, Yeah,
he's a classy guy. But with as far as Mike Leigh, I think NIL by Mouth is a lot closer to him than The War Zone is. Just besides the whole working class milieu and this whole kind of kitchen sink realism, this handheld, gritty style, which you bringing up Naked definitely came to mind, except I would say that this has a lot less levity than Naked does, less verbal fireworks, at least unless you count, apparently this has the record for the number of times. Can I say cunt, the C word?
It's
spoken.
Unwatchables.
I know, it just sounds like
we will bleep
that's like
it.
I know, but that's like the worst word that we've ever had on here. Anyways, it's said 82 times in this movie, which is also just a really British thing. So I don't think that word isn't as naughty there as it is here.
Saying it's a bad word is racist against the British. So
okay, you're
really,
right.
you're stepping on your own toes right there, Mark. Shame
yeah,
on
you're
you.
right.
But
Fuck also gets said like 428 times too. So
I do think there is like a weird introduction sequence to this movie that does feel like I don't know, like I'm about to watch something that could be like a Scorsese movie or a Goodfellas kind of situation, which I don't think it'll be the last time I bring up Scorsese in this, I think. But it is this sort of like all these guys sitting around at a bar and music's playing. It's Eric Clapton's bluesy twangs and everything, and they're just going around and taking the piss, as they call it, and going off on these stories, and they're like endless stories of like, so I'll go in, right, and I do this, and the bird comes out with knockers like this, and stuff like that. So it almost feels like it's going to be this sort of like, yeah, like maybe Tarantino or something like that, like fast talking monologues, and these are going to be kind of gangster, kind of bad boys.
The whole for me, opening credit sequence is like 4 minutes of him just ordering a drink, like to the camera.
It feels kind of high octane, like it's going to be like it's going to be more fun, going to be more fun than it winds up being, for sure. It kind of lulled me and then smacked me in the face.
It definitely has an energy to it that doesn't. It feels like it never really lets up. Like there's scenes where they're just in the house and someone's watching TV or lying on a couch. Like there are moments where things calm down, but I think because of the way the camera really tends to focus on faces, the camera seems to always be like close in someone's face or in their body. That to me always feels like it like drives this tension that you can't get away from. You always feel like, especially when it's in Ray Winstone's face, like at any moment he could explode and sort of spit all over you and beat the shit out of you. Like it's just that threat is always there, even before you know that character is capable of that.
Yeah, it's not like lo-fi necessarily, but it has this. It was very in vogue in that time. This sort of Dogma 95s or handheld, running around, very like camera's constantly moving. If somebody's hand moves, it feels like it's got to follow the hand, kind of that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, obviously this is the only movie we can have to go by to figure out what Gary Oldman, the director, is like. But he definitely likes the shaky camera, the close-ups on people's hands or things that they're playing with. And this is just a very it's loud. There's always talking. There's always something going on. It's always looking at something. There's lots of characters. It's kind of claustrophobic. It's kind of be almost overbearing in that way, which is very different from the war zone, but
very depressing in setting too. Like the first time you get an exterior of where these people live is like just it looks like cell blocks almost in Britain here, and it is just like gray and rainy. And then you go in and you're just getting yelled at by these guys that are drunk at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and just like yelling these horrible sexist stories at you, just like ad nauseum.
And I had a trouble at first figuring out exactly how everybody related to each other too. Like it took us quite a while to kind of figure out, oh, okay, this guy is his wife's brother, and now this is his mom that he's going to stay with. And it really just drops you into the middle of everything, right? And you have to kind of figure out exactly how everybody relates to each other.
I think that's sort of the slow reveal of it is a part of it too. It's just like, oh, that's his mom. Oh man, what a fucked up situation this really is. Like as the movie goes along, I guess.
Right, and so there's no I don't know. Do you feel like there is a main character to this? Because when it starts out, obviously Ray Winstone is, absorbed, sucking in all the air in the room, but then he kind of disappears for a while.
Yeah,
and we follow around his, I guess, brother-in-law who's a heroin addict, and he gets kicked out of the house, gets bitten on the nose, which is a really interesting fighting tech from Ray. And then he kind of takes over as the main character for like a big stretch there. And then we end up back with Ray and his wife, and this becomes kind of a more focused domestic abuse story. And I don't know, it did feel a little unwieldy to me when it kind of lurches in and out of there actually being a narrative, and then back to this kind of plotless slice of life that's more about, the sense of place, like a Mike Leigh movie is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like the focus of the movie, like if there was one character that the movie is most interested in, at least in terms of where our sympathies go, it's definitely Valerie. But it's showing us Valerie through Ray a lot. It's showing the world. We see the world through Ray's eyes mostly, and then through Billy, his brother-in-law. But eventually the film really does turn towards Valerie, and I think makes it about our sympathies with her, and just about seeing the women in this film as, almost like as a unit that have to kind of steel themselves against these horrible men. But
I don't think it's any. Oh, go ahead.
I agree that it doesn't really feel like there's a clear protagonist. I think it's hard not to see Ray as the main guy, because he's his presence takes over.
Yes. I mean, you mentioned the thief, the cook, the wife, and his lover. Is that the right order? I think. But
I think so.
That's what this reminded me of, that even if there are other characters that I do care a lot about or want to know more about, it feels like there's this monster at the center of the movie that keeps on drowning them out, pushing them out of the way, or, sometimes beating them down literally. In this case, and in the case of that film as well, to the point where it is just like, it feels like this monster is pushing me out of the door of this movie. Like, it wants me to leave, and it is just like so off-putting. And I'm also not a fan of Thief, the wife, cook, and his lawyer or whatever either. I know a lot of people love that, including Marc and you. But for the same reason that I was off-put by this movie, I was off-put by that movie, where I was just like, do you want me to leave? I will leave. And this one was really, really difficult for me, both of these. But whoa.
Yeah, the only thing that keeps me from loving the cook, the thief, and et al. From loving it even more is that that central character is so overbearing, with his cruelty.
That's the point. I think that's kind of the point, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is. But it takes up just a lot of real estate in the movie. And, through watching Ray Winstone throughout this, it just makes me wonder, like, how do you even play this kind of a role? Because he is definitely a monster, but not in a fun way. Not even in like a very complex, particularly, dynamic or fascinating way. He is just dumb and loathsome and narcissistic and, and a brute. And just imagining staying in that headspace and being that person for the entirety of a shoot seems like it would have to take some kind of toll on you.
Yeah, he said in a fairly recent interview, he was asked about Warzone and NIL by Mouth together, and he was saying that NIL by Mouth he could do, like, I don't remember if he used the word enjoy, but he did. He was happy to do the role. He figured out how to do it, and he loved working for Gary Oldman. So Gary Oldman's the best he's ever worked for. But he had a really hard time with the role of Dad in the Warzone. I think because the monstrousness of that character for him was worse, and putting himself into the headspace of Dad in Warzone was almost too much for him to handle. But at least that's the way he made it sound in this interview.
Sure, because with this guy wears everything on his sleeve. There's no hiding anything. He's just immediately, the moment you see him, you're just scared. And you could imagine having to live in a house with somebody like that and just constantly being terrified. He's just like an animal.
Yeah.
Yes. And I guess, maybe I'll tip my hand here. Just for the sake of honesty, I mentioned that it was pushing me out the door as a movie, and I did at a certain point. Like it does get to this point where we get to the savage beating of his wife,
Pregnant wife.
We're very aware that she's pregnant. We've been, I think it's emphasized for impact in that way. And then like after watching it, we see her after the fact, and I just had to be honest with myself and could not finish the movie. Which is a thing we've mentioned on the podcast, is like I haven't done it personally for a movie before on our podcast, but we've mentioned it for guests, like, right? And it is being sort of a study of content of like what is your threshold? What is worth your time like getting through, and what will just actually like you're too upset to keep going. And this actually did upset me enough that I felt like I just wasn't mentally prepared to finish it or see any more of it. I guess I'm curious about, like, I don't know what your feelings on that are, I guess, but also like what keeps you going in a movie like this? I don't mean that as like you fucked up guys, who sat through this. I'm just saying like, and was I wrong? Do you think I missed something? Which is always the thing about this podcast is like, we believe that some of these, and I've seen it happen with some movies where it's like, if you can get through the pain, there's some big reward, Yeah,
that's I mean, like I have sort of prided myself on never walking out of a movie, even though there's been some that I really wanted to, but I don't know if that pride has much value in it. That could just be I could be making up the value in that for myself. But I think that there might be, I guess, a lesson or if you get far enough in this film, there's some kind of like wisps of redemption to it. I don't know if, like, I think everyone, if you feel that it's not for you as you're watching it, then, go with that feeling. But by the end of the film, there does seem to, we start to get these like sympathies for Ray. There's that long scene where he's talking to his buddy and he's drinking and he's talking about his dad in the hospital and how he sort of, as his dad's dying, his dad was the same as him based on what he's telling his friend. His dad was an alcoholic rage monster too. And I think he says to his dad, like, oh, he's on his deathbed, like, why didn't you ever love me? And, we get this glimpse of like where this character comes from. And I don't really think we're meant to be like, oh no, poor Ray. Like, I don't think that's the point. But I think it's supposed to give us some insight into like, where this shit comes from, right? Hurt people, that kind of thing. But by the end of the film, like I remember when I first saw this movie way back, being like really shocked by it's pretty much the last scene, which the family's together and they're talking about going to bail out Billy, who's been arrested. And Ray's there and they're all kind of hanging out, and Ray's well dressed and he seems, more sober than usual. And he's there with Valerie, like, with his wife. And it's, on the one hand, you feel like, oh, okay, maybe he's coming around. There's a moment where he starts to get pissed and his friend like looks at him and sort of like shakes his head and sort of telling him, no, keep your cool. You can't be a monster anymore. And Ray calms down. But it's also really shocking to see that they would take him back at all. Like, he just savagely beat this pregnant woman, his wife. And then you see him again with her in the last scene. And it's really hard not to see that scene and not feel like, how will this cycle ever end? Like, it's only a matter of time before he does it again, right? That's how I felt seeing that last scene. So I don't know if we're supposed to actually feel like, oh, there's real redemption for this character potentially on the way, or if this is just all going to happen again and again and again.
And I know I also read, like, after the fact that I guess that's cheating, but I was just unable to finish it. But I did read after the fact that it is dedicated to Gary Oldman's father.
Mm-hmm.
Man, when at the end of this movie, when it goes to black and the text come up that says "in memory of my father," I'm like, holy shit! If I ever get a tribute like that for my kids, it's like this was no dedication.
No.
And apparently, this was something very personal for Gary Oldman to do something like that. And apparently, he did grow up in a kind of public housing situation in this area, and that. I think that when we do see Ray, by the way, his character's name is Ray, actor's name is Ray. It's another kind of blurring here going on. And
Eerie, yeah.
yeah.
Let's call him Ray, and he's going to be a total monster. You'll play him.
Exactly. And when he starts talking about, talking to his own dad and saying, why didn't you ever love me? I can most easily read that as Gary Oldman's attempt at kind of making sense of apparently his own father, who, if he was anything like this, must have been a huge piece of work. So that helps make sense of that for me, because again, when the kind of traditional character beats start to kick in kind of awkwardly throughout, and then at the end, that, I don't know, this is a really strangely kind of lumpy movie when it starts trying to do things that feel a little more like a typical drama, when the early parts are so much more just about realism and texture. So when he has this monologue, which definitely goes a long way towards starting to understand his character, it does seem strangely introspective in a way that he never even like remotely suggested throughout the rest of the movie. Mm-hmm. And he does eventually have this confrontation towards the end with his wife, who she has this, pretty powerful speech that she gives him in the rain about how her life is being thrown away. And that also does feel, I don't know, a little bit like an awards moment or something. Like I can see why she won like a Best Actress prize with getting, a moment like that. Mm-hmm. But then again, that is undercut, I guess, when they go to the next scene and it's flashes forward to the future and they're back together again without any explanation or, seeing exactly how that happened. And that last scene is strange, isn't it? Like, obviously, Seth, you only read about it, but I think it plays even stranger. Like, instead, like it's maybe, I guess it's supposed to be open-ended or maybe purposefully anticlimactic, but the way it goes right to the credits after, it almost feels like that wasn't even intended to be the last scene originally. But I don't know. How did you feel about that, the very ending, Derek, like the way that plays out?
Yeah, I agree that it's weird. I think it's meant to jar us a bit, or at least that's how I felt. Like I just found it really jarring to see Ray there in the last scene with the family, and it's also like it's sort of Kathy, sorry, not Kathy's the actress name, Valerie, your character, in that scene in the rain, she's saying like, I want to have a good life, like I want to have a life where there's love, and all I have is this shit. And it seems like, she can't escape this just like awfulness that sort of surrounds everything. And it feels like even in the last scene, where the last scene feels nicer because the family's there and they're kind of chatting. But the reason why they're all convening is because they're talking, I think, about going to bail out Billy. Like it's still it's still in the context of like bad stuff, right? Like, oh my fuck up heroin addict brother is in jail again for being a fuck up, and we got to go fix him somehow. And hopefully this time it'll stay. Like it's like never good stuff, and so there's just this cloud of awfulness that remains no matter what. So it is like, yeah, I felt that last scene's weird. It's hard to make sense out of how we're supposed to feel about it.
And really, I mean, Seth, I don't blame you for not wanting to finish this movie. I really don't. Like, I wouldn't argue with anybody really who thinks that this is just such overbearing misery for the whole film, that, and so oppressive that there's just not enough like redeeming to get out of it. But, for me, I think it, in the end, and I did feel similarly a lot throughout, I think it just overcomes kind of an aversion that I generally have to like social realist movies that really like to revel in the poverty and the victimization of people, which I think sometimes those movies people are a little too easy on them as far as accepting them and acclaiming them because they seem important or realistic. when dramatically there's not a whole lot going on. But what slightly pushed this over the edge for me, though, is that texture that we do see throughout. So there's small moments, but there's stuff like Billy showing up to his mom and sister to like give them money when he's flush, and they can't stop laughing about how he accidentally stole a picture of Ray's mother, which is like
I
really
loved
pissing him
that
off.
scene.
Yeah.
It was like the
Yeah.
one little like glimpse, at something else. Yeah.
And there's a scene where Billy and a bunch of his friends are sitting watching Apocalypse Now on TV, and this guy has like this Dennis Hopper's whole speech memorized.
That's great.
Which frankly is not
scene.
my favorite scene in Apocalypse Now. So I think I like it better in this movie. And there are some little moments. A lot of them do come after the really ugly stuff, the miscarriage and everything.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah, you did miss a little bit of stuff like the little daughter like writing her name on a balloon and releasing it into the sky. And there's a scene where the mom and grandma are dancing together, which actually there's a lot of songs in here that are not by Eric Clapton. They're like soul or maybe trip hop songs even that play over certain scenes that I found
there was
really,
like a montage.
Hypnotic.
Like when he's like walking around looking for heroin and stuff. It's like very of its time, like Portishead sounding.
Yeah, but the juxtaposition I found really affecting at times and made me wonder what Gary Oldman might have done had he continued directing. There's also a scene towards the very end where the little cute old grandma, who everyone is always berating and calling a cow and harassing, gets up and sings in a bar, and she can like really sing. And I was like, oh, it's hard not to get touched by tender moments like that when everything around it is just so brutal. Although maybe her song choice is a little on the nose. It's like Can't Quit That Man or something, like right before they get back together. But
I mean, what I felt I was promised as a viewer was just pure misery. And I mean, reading about that this has something personal to the author gives it another dimension, but only for the author, I feel like, and maybe a little bit for a viewer that like, oh, okay, he's working through something, but I don't know. Then it is sort of just like, okay, I get it. This is your thing, Gary Oldman. You're working through some demons, because otherwise, I just wonder about the function of this movie at the end of the day. And it reminds me of like Larry Clark as well, although I think this is a much better, I don't know, this has a lot more going for it as far as a film is concerned, and it's made more artfully than a Larry Clark film, I think. But it reminds me of those in the way that I'm like always like, but why am I here? Like looking at this, which I did see this at an early age. I think it was like, I had seen it before, actually. I guess I was like 20 years old or something. And I was just getting into like transgressive movies and experimental movies and like non-Hollywood stuff. So at this point, I was just like, well, this is just how movies are, I guess. And I didn't even know how to be fazed by something like this, I feel like, or really have like actual empathy other than like, wow, these people are fucked up. Whereas now I have lived a bit of a life, and I mean, I work at a job downtown where I do see people that are in really difficult situations, whether I hear about them or not, I can tell, see women with like missing teeth, like missing front teeth, and I'm like, well, I wonder what that is from. I probably know what that is from. So it's just sort of this thing where at my age now, I just have issue with these films that feel like their goal is to remind me this stuff exists, where I just very much know that this exists. Like maybe this would be very good for an out of touch, very wealthy, well-off person who's like, wait, what? This goes on? But like heroin and wife beating? But I don't know. Yeah, that was my feeling about this and movies kind of like it.
Yeah, I think without those little soft touches, like those little moments of heart later in the film, those glimpses that there's still happiness the happiness is still possible even after these horrible things have happened. I think if the movie avoided those, then it would really feel, I think, like a failure. Like something would be lost. Like how can we possibly accept a world that's only bleak? And so I think those little touches are key. But yeah, I really like the grandma singing at the end. I agree, the song choice is on the nose, but yeah, there is something kind of great about that. I love the Apocalypse Now scene. That to me, I was like, I remember reading into that a lot, thinking about how, Apocalypse Now is, you could think of it as a movie about the most abstracted type of villain. Like that scene in NIL by Mouth, it's of Dennis Hopper with his rant about Kurtz. We're hearing about the villain from this other character. And like Kurtz is the most abstracted type of villain, right? This human that's meant to be perceived as like sort of supernatural, and how corrupted he's become because of this.
Especially in the context of that mythologizing monologue. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, compare that to like Ray in NIL by Mouth is about as opposite as it gets as a monster, right? There's nothing abstract about that. He's just pure rage and very real. And I think Gary Oldman is making the point that like these men exist all over the place and we never hear about it, and we don't get the Francis Ford Coppola big production to tell us about it. Well, I'm here to tell you about it in this very stripped down way that I do. Like, I think that's that scene feels like it's about comparing a character like a Kurtz to a Ray. And I don't know, I find that stuff kind of fun to think about. That makes the movie more interesting to me.
Sure. And, usually at the end of each discussion, for each movie, we'll go around and declare whether or not we would unwatch the film. But that's kind of an interesting question here, where Seth kind of unwatched it in real time. Mm-hmm. Is there any, are you satisfied with your, decision not to stick it out and risk it getting even more punishing, but also at the same time, possibly more redeeming? Or is this, are you happy with how this went?
I just think it did fail in keeping me there. Because I do think there is a certain amount of, I don't know, an artist shouldn't be surprised that I leave the room, right? If he's not, I don't know, if he, and I think it maybe does come from the fact that this is for a certain person working out certain things that have to do with them. Otherwise, it is, I don't know, I just couldn't see it as anything more than a reminder that awful things happen, and I'm an adult and I know awful things happen, and I don't need to be like, my nose doesn't need shoved in it as if like I'm being punished for doing it or something. It felt so punishing, again, with so little. And I know like by the end, but I don't know, I was there for about 50 minutes of this movie.
More than that. It was probably it was over an hour, I think.
It was just so relentless, and also just in the way it set up the wife character to be like, look how much fun she's having. Now let's beat the shit out of her now that you like saw her having a good time. I just felt like there wasn't much for me, like keeping me there other than misery. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know why I would stay.
Well, I think we have the right range of like the perfect range of reactions here, because I think I probably was a little just in between the two of you, where I did still end up liking it, but I'm very leery of movies where I get a sense of my face is just being rubbed in unpleasantness, for its own sake. And I think, we have watched some movies like that before that had even less redeeming values. So, I mean, I'll just say I wouldn't unwatch it for the glimpses of what, Gary Oldman can really do as a director. And with actors, obviously, I think is his strength too. And I don't think this is wholly successful with overcoming those things, but I think I got through it a little bit easier than I was expecting to. Although, again, both of these movies have kind of centerpiece scenes that are the real test of whether it's going to be worth your time. Because this is a really tough watch, and I think a lot of people, maybe even who listen to this podcast, will find this to be like one of the more unpleasant to actually sit through films, because you can really drown in this one. But I'll give you the last word, Derek, assuming that you're not going to suddenly unwatch this movie.
I would not unwatch it.
Right.
I think what keeps me in this film more than anything is just the style. I like the way it's shot, and I like the feel of it. The way the soundtrack plays with the whole film. I like the gritty look and feel. I like the way the city looks, especially at night. All those shots at night, sort of seeing them doing their thing earlier in the film, like all that stuff I really like, just as stylistic choices. I definitely find the rough stuff hard to sit through. It's by no means easy or enjoyable. That beating scene is just horrifying.
Well, yeah, I would never accuse anyone or like of enjoying any of that just because you watched the whole thing like I didn't. Yeah, of course
sure.
not.
But yeah, I mean, I would not unwatch. I think it would take a lot. There's only a couple movies that I ever think I would unwatch. It would take a lot for me to actually unwatch something, but I did. Yeah, enjoy is definitely not the right word, but I don't know. I certify this fresh or whatever. Like I see the value in this film for sure, for sure, and beyond the exploitative stuff. Because I agree with everything you guys are saying about the sort of the poverty gazing and the exploiting of the showing people this very gritty, nasty, poor, violent reality that a lot of people in the world actually live through. And rubbing your faces in it as a way to say, look, this happens in real life. I tend to not enjoy things that do that. I think what I like about this movie, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the exploitative side of it. I think that Gary Oldman, I usually try not to think so much about authorial intent. I just want to watch things. I want to examine the text at face value, and that's it. But with this one, I find it hard to not think about what Gary Oldman, how personal it was to him. I watched a little interview with him in '97, like an interview that came out like shortly after the film came out, where he was defending how and why he made the movie, and he seemed really angry. Like he had this chip on his shoulder, where he was saying like, look, I wanted to show the reality of this stuff. I've lived through it. I don't want anyone else to have to live through it if they can avoid. He had this rage in him that you could feel, you could smell the same way that you can smell it when Ray's on screen, right? Just feel this rage. Like there's all this bubbling up stuff in Gary Oldman that seems to have compelled him to make this film. Whereas if you watch more recent interviews with him, where he talks about this film, that rage isn't there anymore. He's either handles the question better or he's dispelled it or whatever, who knows. But that kind of like super personal connection to the thing, for me, it maybe dulls my dislike of exploitative fiction. Because to me, almost seeing him react that way makes it feel like he's not trying to exploit this stuff. It's just, this is the reality he wants to show for these personal reasons. And I guess I can like take that at face value or appreciate it for the intent that he sets out with it.
And I think that's a fair thing to bring to it when you do something like, prominently put in memory of my father is the first thing you see after the credits. That's kind of inviting you in for it to be at least in retrospect, something that is very personal in the way that it's okay to extrapolate from what we see. But hopefully the Warzone dad is not somebody that Tim Roth grew up with. That was based on a novel, so probably not. But it is kind of weird how superficially similar these movies are, with the Warzone coming just 2 years later. It was also the first movie that Tim Roth made, and he has yet to direct another film. And but as superficially similar as these are, I feel like that stylistically they're completely different. That I was kind of surprised that when the Warzone starts, it almost feels like this could be like a prestige film to me. The way that we have these these gorgeous, gloomy landscape shots. There's lots of silences and stillness in a way there isn't in Nil by Mouth. There's even like a twinkly piano score and strings.
It has a more traditional score, so it does feel more, I don't know. But it immediately begins with some like tragic sounding strings and tragic sounding piano.
Yeah, but it's like signaling things in a way that No My Mouth doesn't really. Which is just a different kind of. It's just a different approach. I actually did think about that. It's a very late 90s kind of style and sound, right?
Yeah, so that's the happy part. We have to have the happy part in the music. And now the sad part, we have the sad part in the music.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is the director of photography for this, Seamus McGarvey. He would go on to shoot The Avengers and 50 Shades of Grey, of all movies. So this is clearly like a little bit more of a mainstream guy, but this is closer to movies that he did.
Seamus McGarvey is his name?
That's his actual real name. I know it sounds like I'm conjuring an offensive stereotype, but that's real.
If you say it 10 times, he'll appear behind you.
But this probably has more. He also did Atonement and The Hours, other kind of awards-friendly things, which, again, this is way, way more harrowing than movies like that. But I did find it really interesting when this started that I was like, this is a whole different feel to it.
Yeah.
But do you feel that way?
Yeah, totally. All the grit is gone. It feels way more like an art film. In this time, like leading up to this discussion, I've been thinking about what each film reminds me of, like which directors they remind me of. And I kind of feel like watching Nil by Mouth feels like if the Safdie brothers made something in the 90s, at least in terms of like how it gets so intense by like really focusing it on faces and people. But this reminds me of like some French stuff, like a Bruno Dumont or something like that. Like this, the stillness and these landscape shots, but where there's like extremely dark shit coming.
Very stark, very arty Euro kind of deal.
Totally.
I thought a little bit about The Sweet Hereafter, who's another big Canadian filmmaker, Adam McGowan, who did Exotica, and it also is about like a really awful tragedy that's affecting a small town. There's even a kind of incest subplot in it. Very different movie from this, but they do stylistically have this kind of more, poetic, open air kind of feeling to them.
Audience, it is about incest.
It is. And again, we do have Ray Winstone, but I think I got to give him credit for making these two monster fathers seem completely distinct from each other. Like this is a whole different kind of performance, a whole different guy. This is a guy who, when you first meet him for the first couple scenes, you're wondering what you're going to find out is horrible about him. Or maybe you have an idea from, a plot synopsis, but he doesn't seem like it. He seems almost like safe and friendly, right?
Pretty hard, like watching it right after Nil, though. If you're at all aware of his performance in that, you're just like.
But the contrast between, if you were watching them back to back, right? I mean, this is a guy who is very much trying to like justify what he's doing, and wear this mask in a way that Ray doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in the War Zone you see a couple glimpses of the rage that you see throughout all of Nil by Mouth, but it's not as intense. You see him kind of go crazy swearing like once or twice, and mostly in that like last scene when Tom confronts him. But it's like nothing like how you're constantly seeing in Nil by Mouth, which is pure ball of rage all the time. Like he is suppressing stuff throughout the War Zone. But maybe it was also from watching Nil so shortly before, but it's hard not to feel scared when he's on screen in the War Zone. There is this feeling of dread that he just brings with him. I think that's part of Ray Winstone's intensity, but I think it also just has to do with having, you just saw him in Nil by Mouth, and there's lots of reasons to be dreadful about him, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it
it's
is-
wondering
oh.
when and how it's going to manifest instead of just him constantly being this powder keg, everywhere. But there is a definite main character here. This is a much smaller, more focused story, and it's this son, whose name I'm forgetting.
Tom.
But whoever plays him could play him
Tom.
in an Elliott Smith biopic. Total,
Yeah.
right?
So complete with the acne scars.
Yeah. So this is really from his perspective over everyone else's, including his sisters and his father's, or his mother, played by Tilda Swinton, by the way, in what I have to imagine is like a really good like post-pregnancy fat suit or something, because I've like never seen her look like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's always rail thin,
Mm-hmm.
This movie is a surprisingly strong famous cast. It's a small cast, but it's like Ray Winstone, Tilda Swinton, and Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell out of nowhere. He's just
right?
the beau at the
Young
bar
Colin
that the daughter character is hanging out with.
Did you recognize him right away? It took me like a minute to go from, hey, that guy, that kid kind of looks like a child Colin Farrell, to, okay, that has to actually be him.
Definitely him. There he is.
You don't expect, in a movie that's like this rough and dark and niche, I guess, like, you don't expect big names. I don't know why, but you figure they wouldn't get involved or something like that.
Well,
of course, this is more like a cameo.
Yeah.
Like he's barely in the movie.
But it is, both of these films, one of the things that these two films share is that they're super well acted. And I don't think they could survive without that. I think the acting really holds them up.
And the guy in this main
Tom
role is
and
not
the daughter, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Tom is only in a couple other movies, so it seems like was maybe more of a non-professional. I'm not sure where he came from, but he hardly did anything after this.
Yeah, and he's great in it. I mean, I can't picture anyone else in this role doing it. He's like this, affected kind of. He comes off as like this angsty, gothy teenager, but his mode in the film it just feels perfect. Everything feels. The nuance of this film is incredible. I think The Warzone's a really well-made movie, despite how hard to watch it might be. And I think a lot of that has to do with the nuance of how it handles the subject matter and the characters' responses to what's happening.
I agree. And I think this one, even more so than NIL by Mouth, like relies on one scene to just completely horrify you. It's like without this central scene where where Tom finally actually witnesses kind of, I guess he already has had his suspicions confirmed. It's strange. The first time that he is kind of walking outside and looks in the bathroom window and is clearly seeing something horrible, but we're not allowed to see anything.
We don't see it.
And I thought that was really smart. Like we're like, if anything, it's very haunting. We're like, what did he see? We're worried about it. Maybe we even doubt what he saw. Like he would, like like, okay, well, maybe she's right. Maybe I didn't see what I thought I saw. And we can't verify, which is interesting. But yeah, the big scene we do see, and it is horrible.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered movies like Irreversible and, some things that have had some really, really awful, scenes of sexual assault. And I got to say, I mean, this has to be one of the absolute worst. I mean, besides the fact that it's a father and a daughter. And I did read a little bit about Ray Winstone talking about, filming that scene and how upsetting he found it. And he was kind of a little mad at Tim Roth just for even like wanting him to do it. And obviously
you don't gotta do it, my guy. Like, you don't gotta take the job. Like, ugh.
And I refuse to believe this is true, but this is in like a book about Ray Winstone that I read an excerpt from. And it claims that the producers wanted to hire his own daughter to play the role of the daughter. And he immediately said, no, that's a deal breaker. But this is in like a biography of him. So I don't know where that piece of information came from. I can't. And obviously he was just immediately said, yeah, no way. But
wow. Yeah. Someone
can you imagine?
What the fuck?
That's insane. That's fucking crazy. I can't believe that.
I know, I really find it hard to believe, but I don't know. I read it.
And I think Ray Winstone is like famously a real life tough guy. Like he was a boxer and he grew up really rough. And so it's like, you're going to throw that at this guy? You're going to suggest to him that he should be like mock raping his own daughter on screen? Like, aren't you worried about getting knocked out?
I know. Yeah, that's when he beats you down Joe Pesci style at the bar.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so that's, it's a very protracted graphic scene. But, at this point, I guess, this is another time where you have to ask yourself, how much of this movie is us just watching innocents suffer and then roll credits? And how much is that worth compared to the way that NIL by Mouth handles it? Because this seems a lot more, I don't know, airless. There's not a lot of other things, going around as far as exploring the place and the way of life and lots of other characters. This is a very focused story that is quite simple in the end and obviously disturbing. But, by this point, we already have photographic evidence of what's going on. So it's interesting how it goes so quickly from not showing us what's going on, but him being convinced it's happening, to then confirming it, to then us being subjected to it.
We must
at
linger
length.
on it.
Mhm.
Yes.
So,
And
how
see
do we
this girl.
compare this to NIL by Mouth as far as how it handles the misery of it all?
Yeah, I don't know. They both feel fucking miserable to me. Different as they may be.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I had more trouble. I don't know. I had some trouble with this one for sure, in the way that I don't even know. Like they're trying to push buttons in this sort of way of also lingering. Like they want us to be seeing the sister characters through the eyes of the son at a certain point. He like walks in on her, which they're like a family where everybody just walks around naked, it seems, first of all. It just kind of like he just walks in on her and is like confronting her, and there is like this moment where she like asks him if he wants to do it when he's accusing her of having sex with her father, and we linger on her body like in an uncomfortable way that is like, seems purposefully sensual, which if anything, that seemed like off-putting and offensive in its own way. Like, I don't know what it's trying to do. Like at worst, it feels like it's trying to make me like, see, you're a fucking twisted pervert yourself too, huh? Or like, is this like, has like, I couldn't tell if this has like a really bleak kind of nihilistic like core, which is that we're all kind of like monstrous and have these monstrous parts to us, without showing much light at all. I mean, that yes, maybe we do have some monster in us all, but I don't know. I didn't seem to point towards much else other than darkness.
Yeah, I agree that it's very uncomfortable the way the film lingers on her body in those earlier scenes, and
even in the rape scene, yeah,
it's in the earlier scenes, like where you see her naked in front of her brother. Those I read that as the camera's trying to titillate you a bit to like get your guard down, get you out of your comfort zone, or like maybe even like at worst kind of like do that really nasty thing where it's trying to turn you on in the context of a film like this, where it's bound to show you something really horrible. And then I don't know, maybe, I don't know if it's meant to make you feel guilty about that, but I think there's more. I don't really believe that that's the whole story. Like I think that I think that this movie is definitely about a monster, and is trying to show us, the dad as this like totally demonic monster figure, but that how everyone else around him was sort of victimized by him. There's no real answer to like, what do you do about this, right? Like nothing in the end is solved. It's all, in the end, it's all just trauma and horribleness. And that sort of feels like the point, that in these types of scenarios, this stuff doesn't tend to have a happy ending, and and there's, how do we know how to do the right thing? What's the right thing when confronted with this kind of thing? And I think that's why it's told through Tom's perspective. And I love the way that we see Tom deal with this, because it feels very real. He's only 15, and his instinct is to accuse his sister of being the bad one. Like she's doing this, like she should know better. And it's like, how would a 15-year-old boy know how to see her as more of a victim and know how to like not confront her about it? Like, I think that stuff's handled really well. It feels quite believable, and it really makes you sympathize with her.
Yeah, and I think what my main issue might come down to with this is that finding out that it was based on a book kind of made sense to me, because I feel that a lot of movies that are based on novels and just tend to go with the surface level events of what's happening, and an interior monologue is not something that film is very well suited to portray. And I feel that maybe that's a little bit of what's missing here, that there could be more under the surface that we're not getting, because this is such a simple story in the end in the way that it's presented. And especially if you're going to go into territory like suggesting that maybe on some level this daughter is in a participatory, victim mindset, which another movie we talked about, Mysterious Skin, very much gets into. And it's a very sensitive, touchy territory. And I'm not sure that the sister is enough of a character in this movie to really grapple with, the implications of that. And maybe that's something that would be more easily explored in a novel. Maybe, and in the same part with her brother, because even though we see a lot of what he's going through in this, so much of it is so quiet and withdrawn that, I think he does a really good job with what he's given, but what he's given is a lot of times just different variations on sulking. And
yeah, see, that's a good point that you're bringing up, because I feel like it is something I wondered about when I went in knowing that it was a book, and it's almost as like if you saw, like if somebody made a Lolita adaptation and you never heard anything that was going on inside the head of the guy, the main character in Lolita, which is like what the whole thing is. Otherwise, it would just be like, oh, creepy old man goes after young girl, and I don't know. It's like, that is kind of how this felt, is like I have to do a lot of work to imply things in what maybe is going on in the psychic exchanges and in the silences.
Yeah, it's like I either wanted more of getting into the father and the sister as far as into their heads, or, and probably more preferably, laser focus on this being about the perception of Tom in a way that's a little more complicated than we get here. And in the way that Mysterious Skin, is so super subjective, and it feels risky. But, maybe there would have been another extra story in here, not just about the horrors of incest, but about, this particular boy's perception and the way that things seem to change and how he grapples with his dad and sister. Just maybe more than is we get on the page, for just this more visual medium than a book would have been. So yeah, that's just, I haven't read the book. I'm glad that I didn't find out too far ahead of time that it was based on the book, and I might have been tempted to read it. And this isn't something I need to spend more time with, I don't think. But
oh, come on, Mark, great fun.
But I think in the end, the most psychological acuity ends up going to Ray Winstone's character, just because when he finally is confronted with it in the end, the way that he blows into this denial, this rageful denial, was kind of fascinating.
He's like vomiting up every excuse in the book, like every narrative someone spins against a victim, right?
Yeah, it was like a master class in victim blaming and in never admitting what he was doing, but just that, you implanted, not only did you come up with this, but you implanted these thoughts in your sister's head, but it's okay, you're not sick. This is just something teenagers go through. It's just endless.
And Ray Winstone in those scenes sells it so well that you believe that he believes what he's saying. Like
absolutely,
you believe that he must be convinced of the lie, even though well, we've seen him rape his daughter. Like we all know that it's true, right? We all know that it's true. But he acts those scenes super well. You feel like he's in some kind of special form of denial that, to us watching, like to the audience, is impossible to reconcile.
Well, on the subject of his denial, I thought my favorite thing in the entire movie, which I thought really was an interesting core going on to Ray's character and the movie, maybe even some of the character dimensions and more ugly desires that some of the characters may or may not have, is I think it's early in the movie where he describes a car crash that happened, and it's that whole thing that it's brought up by many people as famous like anecdote where like someone sees a woman under a car and they just all of a sudden can lift the car to free the woman because they're just filled with so much want and desire and like energy or something. And I almost viewed that, and it's in the reason he brings that up, which again is like a thing that people think is very positive. The reason he brings that up is in the context of Tom asking about, would you ever leave mom? Would you ever divorce mom? Or something to that effect. And it's I forget what the context is exactly what he says, but it's something to do with if you could talk yourself into it. And if you could talk yourself into doing something like that, how willing you are to hurt somebody, how willing you are to do something rash or unthinkable, which he compares to being able to somehow lift a car, which in his mind, if you expound that, it's having so much denial that you can somehow justify raping your own family and doing all these horrible things and still just keeping yourself going and not being totally destroyed by guilt. I don't know. I thought that alone was very worthwhile. That was interesting.
Do you think that it all maybe plays into what happens at the end with, spoiler alert, if anybody if we're making this movie sound super tantalizing to you, definitely go watch it now. But, Tom ends up stabbing, his dad to death.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we make of the movie basically ending on that? It feels very blunt to me, the way afterwards he's just like, well, I don't know, what are we gonna do? What does any of this mean? And then the camera just floats away. Movie ends.
Well, it doesn't just float away, right? They're in the secret place where he would take the dad would take the daughter to rape her, basically, and he says, what are we going to do now? And then he closes the door and we leave and we zoom out and leave them, which to me is very ominous. There's all sorts of it's almost kind of creepy. Like they're like shutting out the world. It's like despair. Also at worst, like maybe they're going to, I don't know if there's like further incestuous angle here. I don't even know.
Yeah, I think I like the uncertainty of that. I think so. The way I read the last couple scenes was that Tom stabs his dad, and then they go and retreat to the bunker, and we don't actually know if he dies or not. Because I think Tom asks his sister, "Is he dead?" And I don't think she answers. I don't think we get a clear answer about whether he dies or not. Because he's lying on the floor, he gets stabbed in the gut, and he's lying on the floor, kind of screaming. And
it's not looking good.
No, he's either going to die or he's going to be in for a not very pleasant, long recovery and maybe permanently fucked up. But the way that I read that, the whole Tom stabbing him and the future fallout of that we don't see, is that there's no Hollywood hero here, right? You hear in movie, it's like a cliche of the son that kills his father because his father was beating his mom, right? This comes up in fiction all the time. And we see anti-heroes that have that backstory. It's supposed to feel kind of, there's something kind of valiant. We like characters that have that type of backstory. And here we see a real, what feels like an attempt at a very real look at something like that, and it doesn't feel good. Like when Tom is standing in front of Ray, and we know he's holding the knife, and Ray's, or I'm calling him Ray, the dad, the character's name is his dad. I'm the whole time in my head, I'm like screaming, "No, don't fucking stab him! Like, don't stab him! That's not going to fix this." Like, it just feels like all that does is create new nightmares. So what? You're going to go to jail now for murdering your father? Like, it just compounds the family trauma. There's no way him stabbing him is a good thing. And so, and because we don't actually know if he dies or not, there's just this whirlwind of uncertainty about the ending where it feels like nothing is solved. All that's left is just a pile of shit. And I guess the point there feels like it's about how this is what happened. You know, this is what doing this kind of thing to a family member does. Like, it just creates trauma. There's nothing good. Trauma does not create a good byproduct. It is only destructive. The body does not. You know, you hurt your body to a certain extent, and the body heals and gets stronger. Right? Exercise is like that. But trauma doesn't have that effect. You put the body or the mind through trauma, and it is solely destructive. And it takes tons of work to try to come back from that. And I think that this film feels like it's saying that, like, all that's going to be left is just destruction. There's no good that comes out of this, including.
There's definitely no catharsis.
No, not at all.
Because, you know, now, even if you have a little moment of just like, yeah, motherfucker, take that knife, it's still, now he's never going to have to reckon with what he did or take responsibility or admit it, which he never does to the very end, or have to be held accountable. It's, you know, maybe he's being let off the hook in a way.
And Tilda is left. I mean, I don't even want to talk about the worst part of this. Like, what is even worse, like, in the end, like, the implication that, like, the baby is somehow, like, abused.
I was a little confused about that. Were they suggesting that he might have already been abusing him, or that just the son was worried that he would in the future?
The baby is in, like, it goes to the hospital like a couple different times.
Yeah, I think,
like, and they're like talking about, like, the baby's bleeding somehow. Like,
yeah, it seems like there's maybe an implication that the dad could have also been abusing the baby, but I think
the
at
baby
that point,
cries in every single scene in the movie.
Yeah, I guess we can't know, but also, I also thought that the reason why Tom chooses that moment to tell her, with the baby being so vulnerable, is just that, like, I guess he feels like he has to get through. How do I make sure I'll get through to my mom about something like this without actually telling? Like, all he says is, like, "Don't let dad near the baby. Don't trust him," and that's it. That's all he says. But it definitely has a desired effect, because then, you know, he gets home and she's already called police, and she won't speak to him on the phone. And I think there's some, like, it seems like the film is saying that a mother will always trust her son's intuition, something like that. She'll know her children, right? She'll trust her children's intuition about something like that, safety. So there is almost something, like, a little bit comforting about that, because so many of these abuse stories, we see parents that don't believe their victimized children, and they take the side of the spouse that's doing the abuse. And we see all kinds of examples of that. And I like that this film doesn't go there. That it takes a different angle on that.
It is interesting that, you know, he does blow the whistle on him before all this happens. It seems like the mom believes him. And yet he still ends up in this situation where he ends up stabbing him.
He just can't help himself. Right?
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The whole baby thing was where I was set over the edge, and I was like, I was like, why do I do this to myself? Like, what is? I
honestly wasn't. I wasn't sure that's what was being suggested. Like, I couldn't decide on that. Obviously, it comes to the forefront when he says he, like, wants to protect the baby, but I could never figure out exactly what they were implying with that.
I think we're not supposed to know. I think
Which maybe is for the best.
Yeah, I blocked that thought out.
I just thought there was I thought there was a real implication, like specifically because of the emphasis on the baby being brought to the hospital twice, the baby crying in every single scene.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was just, that was one too far, and I was just like, I was prepared for this movie. I was like ready to like go in for that, but then that was just like one too far for me.
Yeah, well, let's jump off that. No, go ahead.
If we are meant to like read a bit more into that implication about the baby, that really kind of makes me want to ask why, right? Isn't it enough? Isn't it enough that he's already involved in this incestuous relationship with his daughter? The fact that we see him rape his own daughter, isn't that enough? If we're supposed to get some kind of a point about this monstrous father figure or about this type of abuse in families, why would there be any need to take it to the baby then? And I definitely can't figure out an answer to that one. But this brings me to a bigger question that I really think about with this film, that I rarely think about with most films, but I can't avoid it with this one, which is apparently a question that was asked at this TIFF premiere in 1999, asked of Tim Roth, which people in the audience were asking, why did you make this film? And I wasn't there for that. This was like secondhand from my cousin, so I can't remember. I remember them talking to me about this, but I don't know what the answer was. But I've always felt like that question is kind of like not allowed. I remember when I joined my writing group in 2007. I've been a member of the same writing group for a long time. I joined in 2007, and I remember on day one, they told me, we don't have a lot of like formal rules about what you can and can't do, like what you can and can't ask another writer. But there's one major rule, which you can't ask another writer why they wrote the thing that they wrote. You can criticize it to all hell, you can tear it to pieces, find all the things wrong with it, sure. But you can't ask them why they wrote it. And I think, if I remember, the logic behind why that's a rule is that it's none of our business. Like, we're not privy to why an artist makes the art they make, and it's not our right to know. I think art needs to be allowed to be made freely for it to flourish in any context. And so when I think about a movie like this, where I really want to know, okay, why did you make this? And I know that Tim Roth himself has admitted to being a victim of sexual abuse in the family as a child. I think his grandfather abused him and his dad. But even then, I think even if you remove that question of why this film, why did you make it, why like this, that question still lingers with me, and I have to fight really hard to tell myself, no, don't ask that. That doesn't matter. The work of art must be allowed to exist, even if it's horrible. Even if it's horrible, the work of art must be allowed to exist. I kind of believe in that. There's a purity to that, I think, when it comes to pretty much any work of art. It would take a lot for me to say, okay, I think this film or whatever it is you're showing me shouldn't exist. I definitely don't feel that way about the Rose.
Yeah.
Maybe
I would definitely agree with that aspect. I would still, though, think that it's a pertinent question as to, I don't know, it's an understandable question as to like, what is the function of this?
Mm-hmm.
And
maybe it's something
bringing me here or sharing it with others, which I could see now that you've mentioned Tim Roth being having a history with this, much like Gary Oldman had a history with that. That all, like, both of those things give these movies, at least in the context of their authors, like, answer that question for me, at least on some sort of level, right? Outside of that, I mean, with both of these, my only argument for them really being of worth, it seems, for a like suggestion to another film goer would be out of like, if you have a history with this, I could imagine, or if you are just particularly interested in this subject.
Mm-hmm.
They both seem like earnest movies to me, that I wouldn't call either of them exploitative, because I think that suggests that their intentions in trying to shock you are a little more, prurient or disingenuous. And I definitely don't get that sense from them. But
I see some
maybe
periods here. I don't know. I do think there is some.
well, that's fine too. Maybe there is.
Yeah, I definitely see that, and I think it is kind of the scary thing going on. That's very uncomfortable, maybe, but I don't know. I do think there is some sensuality that's pushed here, which I guess it's probably just going to this really weird, like intense Freudian place of like begging the question of like where the lines are drawn, really, at least in your own head,
And maybe that does go back to intention, but in the end, maybe a better way to phrase that question of, why would you or did you make this is just all you can do is ask yourself is why should I read this or watch this? And
That's a better question.
That's something that only each individual person can answer. And you can definitely, criticize things in the work as far as whether you find the answer to be, good enough or worthwhile enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe that's the question I want to ask about both these movies here, just in our final thoughts, is first of all, which one you do think is a better movie. I don't know if I want to say is the right word for them. I think I appreciated NIL by Mouth more than The War Zone because it does seem to have a little more going on under the hood, or a little more room to move around in than the War Zone does, which did give me more of a feeling of why am I watching this? It's certainly a very well-made movie and it's powerful in certain ways, but it is a big ask for me personally, to go through a lot of this stuff. And is it just to land on, man, this is all just shit, ain't it? Or, oh man, I never really thought about how bad incest was before. I needed a little bit more psychologically, maybe.
Now I know it's
going
bad.
on. Exactly. So I wouldn't unwatch either of them, but I would definitely, if I had to go with one, I would go with NIL by Mouth. And I'm definitely curious to hear Seth's answer on this, and then we can let Derek have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I like the filmmaking a lot more in NIL by Mouth. That showed a lot of promise. I was really excited by that. I do think it was just too punishing for me and didn't like give enough. And this also, while I like the starkness, I like what's going on, the way it's set up. I think it's a very competent film, the way it tells its story and unravels everything. I just found myself left with I didn't know why I stayed in the room this time. Like the first, like NIL by Mouth, I left the room, and I know why I left the room. With this one, I stayed in the room, and I'm not exactly sure why I stayed in the room once I was done, especially with like its final moments being so like even pushing me even further into the darkness of the situation. Other than, once again, just feeling as though I'm just simply being reminded, like that's all. Again, I'm not criticizing the filmmaker or the author, especially in the context of this, where the author is clearly working through like demons and things and real past traumas. But for me, I also felt like I didn't need this reminder necessarily of the bile in life.
Well, Derek, I am curious to know which of these, or are they both on kind of equal footing for you?
Oh yeah, I guess I do have to use the word unwatch. Yeah, I guess I would unwatch this one.
I think it would do you good to unwatch these.
It's just part of the game. you got to say which one it is. Like,
I definitely would not unwatch either of them. I think I quote unquote enjoyed NIL by Mouth more. The style of NIL by Mouth I found like more fun. I like the camera work a lot. I really like the look and feel of NIL by Mouth. I like the look and feel of the War Zone as well. But the dread I felt watching the War Zone was almost too much to allow me to like open up to it. Like I felt like I was wearing a lot of armor while I was watching the War Zone. Whereas with NIL by Mouth, I didn't feel that way. I do definitely feel like both are good films. Like they're both well-made films. I love Ray Winstone generally, like anytime I see him on screen in any film, I love him. But I just think he's so good at what he does. And I think there's a lot of competence in terms of directing and acting in both these films. I definitely feel better watching NIL by Mouth, I guess is the way I would put it. But the Warzone, I'm more interested in things coming out of the Warzone. It's like a film I almost like think a bit more deeply about. It's hard for me not to think about a writer like Peter Sotos when I'm thinking about the Warzone. Peter Sotos is the super, super notorious, writing all these books.
Right?
Does he have a book called Cows? I'm not sure.
I thought that was him. I don't know.
There's a bunch. He has a bunch. Index is the one. Index is the only like full book of his that I've read. Because they're hard to find. They go out of print fast, and then they resell for hundreds of dollars. Because they're all extremely.
I'm thinking Mathos Stoko. Never mind.
Okay. No, Peter Sotos has written a number of books that are all. He's considered almost like this devil figure in the like transgressive writing world, where his work is.
Fuck this guy!
It's
oh
like
my god,
so,
the White House guy. Whoa, the guy with the yeah.
His work is just so rough, and it's often about pedophilia, and it's often about true crime, and he covers like all these stories about dead children, and he seems to revel in it. Like his writing does not shy away from getting graphic, but even in his work that's not about the like dead children, the stuff that's like just about sex, he seems really interested in showing you the worst ways in which like sex and obsession and lust and desire, like how it tears people apart, how it can really like destroy a person or a family or all this stuff, right? How it can bring out the worst in us, and that idea interests me because I'm curious about the things that stay hidden in the shadows. In polite society, we're not supposed to talk about that stuff, and I think Peter Sotos is one of those guys that says, "Fuck that, we're going to talk about this stuff." And that, for me, always comes back to this idea that if you have dark thoughts and you repress them and suppress them, they're going to come out in bad ways eventually. So you can use art to channel them as either a writer or an audience member. You can engage with really dark material but potentially like channel some of those dark thoughts in a way so that you don't repress them, so that they're dealt with. And I almost feel like the Warzone is driving at something like that. He's sort of saying like, hey, incest exists just as much as like decapitating motherfuckers in medieval times existed. This is the bad thing I want to deal with. I don't know what to make of what I'm seeing on screen. It's all very unpleasant, but I feel like it's not that there's a lesson there, but there's this feeling that like confronting these really horrible things is not necessarily bad. I don't know what other value to find in it, but it feels like something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring up Peter Sotos because that was there were certain moments where I think at the end, I leave thinking that at least the writer of the book is not, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I had moments where I was worried that he was a Peter Sotos sort of character, that there were some flourishes of like, maybe he's actually kind of into this. Like in, which Peter Sotos is famously like, he is into pedophilia. He is like into kids. And yeah, I kind of, that was an added element of the discomfort for me, that there was like, maybe not so much in the direction that Tim Roth is giving, but I would be curious about the book itself, because some of this like obsessive nature, it did feel like there was an obsessive nature with the power dynamics of like youth and an older person, even in a seemingly more innocuous scene with like an older woman kind of wanting to take the virginity of Tom in this movie. There's like, it's very much about that.
And Tom's presented as like a voyeur in a sense, right? With the camera, and he's catching them through the window. Like, and his name is Tom. He's kind of like a peeping Tom. And so it's hard to separate you could look at him as ultimately taking this role that's meant to protect his sister because he's trying to uncover this thing and confront it. But he does also seem somewhat tantalized by it and you can't look away from it. So there's some shit there that I don't know what to do with. It's hard to make sense out of where Tom's at in all of this. His anger towards his sister could be read as jealousy, right? It could be read as jealousy. It's hard to know.
Well, Seth, do you want me to send you a copy of the book?
No, thank you. I'm good.
Oh. All right.
But I don't want to get any paper cuts. Only audiobooks for me, please.
All right. I'll send you the audiobook. I just want you to spend a little more time in this world since
I think
you were so thrilled with it.
Unreadables. We've always talked about it.
For sure. There would be a little longer turnaround time, I think, between episodes. But all right. So, Derek, before we let you go, we like to put everybody on the record with what is your favorite film? One of these two?
Question.
It's not one of these that made me question why I do this podcast, right? Which, I think you win. You I'm not criticizing you. You, in the context of the podcast, you checkmated me. You won the game.
I checkmated you by choosing these?
I said uncle. Uncle.
Well, I'm very happy I could checkmate you. I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah, he almost ended the podcast.
I'll send you my therapy bills.
It's like one of those memes where it's like after you get through all the boss fights, and then this is the final boss. I'm the final boss of Unwatchables podcast.
A little bit.
I'm honored. I'm delighted to hear that. My favorite movie. I want to give you 20. I have my pretentious answer and my unpretentious answer, and my pretentious answer is usually a more arty film that I really love, but I haven't actually watched that many times. But I really, really love the style. And that's probably Paris, Texas.
Cool.
And then my unpretentious answer is probably something like Heat or Goodfellas.
Cool. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I need to see Paris, Texas. That's been on my watch list for forever.
It's great. I love it. It's so great. I love anything that's super slow burn and arty like that. There's others like it. There's three. Honestly, when it comes to that favorite movie question, there's three movies that are of the same style that I really do love equally, which are Paris, Texas, Beau Travail, and In the Mood for Love. I can't really pick between the three.
Sick. Yeah, love all those. Especially In the Mood for Love.
Oh, that's the best.
Yeah, I love that stuff. All
right, you should have picked one of those. You can do an Unwatchables on In the Mood for Love.
We just hate love.
No, think about that.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, you didn't unwatch either of these movies, but can you think of a movie you would consider unwatchable, whether it's something you just really wish you had never seen, or however you want to define that term?
The movie that I had the most trouble sitting through of any film that I saw in a theater, where because if you're watching at home, you can pause it or whatever. But the movie that I think that I had the hardest time watching was the movie Enter the Void by Gaspar Noé. Not because I found the content matter too rough, but I found it so fucking boring. I wanted to tear my eyes out. I just hated it.
It's on the list. So yeah, it's on the list because I think it does put people off for various reasons. If you're not, if you're not put off by the gory details and the intensity of the visuals, it is just asking so much of a viewer in so many ways. Yeah.
And I can deal with, the gory details don't usually bother me. My favorite, the film that I think is Gaspar Noé's best is Irreversible, as hard to watch as some of those scenes are. I do think it's a really well-made film. But Enter the Void, I was really, really angry at having sat through all of it by the end. I remember about halfway through being should I just fucking leave the theater? And it was at the film festival. I think he was there. I think Gaspar Noé was there. But I was just
and you punched him in the face.
Yeah.
He stabbed him with a butcher knife and left him in his bedroom.
Yeah, so I guess I would pick that.
Okay, well that's a very fair answer. And what is the other? Oh, so can you think of a movie where you had a drastic change of opinion on it in either direction, from love to hate, from hate to love, from indifference to love?
Like over time, you mean?
Sure.
Well, that's an interesting question. A drastic change of opinion. I mean, we talked about Apocalypse Now because it comes up in NIL by Mouth, and I remember first seeing that film when I was younger and kind of not getting it and being bored with it, and now I love it. Like now I think of it as one of my all-time favorites. So maybe that one.
I'm glad to hear you came around.
Yeah, but I was a kid.
And
like when I first saw it, I was a kid, right?
And good NIL by Mouth connection too.
Yeah, right.
So, but our most important question that we ask every guest that is very, very significant, which you may or may not be able to answer, is about Southland Tales. Is it good or is it bad?
I don't know what that is.
All right. Our most common answer.
I think that's actually that's a new one though. Don't know what it is. Usually it's like, I just have it, you know.
That's true.
Yeah.
It was just a big argument on our podcast. It was Richard Kelly's second movie after Donnie Darko. And
okay.
It's
famously, like, it's just really sprawling, crazy 3-hour movie, sci-fi movie starring The Rock, and everyone else who was a famous actor at that time. It's a really, really crazy movie. I am whatever the good side of the yin yang is, and Marc is the whatever the bad side of the yin yang is on it.
I see.
Yeah, he's on the wrong side, and I'm on the other side.
See, you just have to figure out which
side
you're on.
If you ever watch us, shoot us an email, and we'll add you to the tally.
Okay, cool. Deal. Will do.
Well, I think this was a really good discussion about the things that people are going to grapple with when it comes to watching these movies. And I think we covered the whole spectrum of that. So, Derek, thank you for engaging us with this and for letting us read some of your book. And Container. I'm sorry, is it Containers or Container? Container. All right. So The Container. No, I'm just kidding. Container, make sure you check that out. Is the best place to get it through With the Next Books and their website?
I think so. If you live in the U.S., yeah. I'm Canadian, so some listeners, if they're ordering it from Canada, the shipping from the publishing house directly is much higher. So in that case, I don't know. I guess Amazon ordering it directly from a bookstore is good. Like I've always enjoyed ordering stuff from Powell's because Powell's Books has really good shipping even to Canada, and I know they carry this. So that's one good option. Either from With an X directly or from an independent bookstore, sort of like a Powell's.
All right. Well, we wish you the best of luck with that, and everyone. I mean, check it out. It is interesting and exciting and dark, and kind of sounds like I'm talking about the movies we just talked about, except for the exciting part. But yeah, thanks again for coming on, and everyone, just hug your families. But that's it. That's it. Yes. Just hugs.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. That's what I'm here for.
Thank you for the advice.
The more you know.
All right.
Thanks.
I think we got an ending in there somewhere.
Appreciate it very much.
There's no fighting in the war zone. I had to make that joke.
I'm so glad I didn't stop recording before you said that. Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.